Do you enjoy books that take big, complex issues and distill them into engaging, easy to digest narratives? Or do you like exploring how small changes can lead to massive societal shifts? If so, then today's book just might be for you. Today, I'll be reviewing Revenge of the Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and today we are taking a look at the latest book by one of the most successful nonfiction authors of this millennium. A quarter of a century after introducing the world to his concept of tipping points, Malcolm Gladwell returns with a fresh perspective on the topic, this time focusing on the unintended consequences and the ways these societal phenomena can be manipulated. In Revenge of the Tipping Point, he examines how small changes, once thought to be organic and beneficial, can be weaponized to serve powerful agendas or spiral out of control in ways no one anticipates. In this book, Gladwell sets out to answer a fascinating set of questions. For example, what made Miami the cultural and economic powerhouse that it is today, with lots of crime? Or how does the plight of the cheetah reflect broader issues in parenting and childhood development? And probably one of the most interesting sections that I found in the entire book was his question on why do Ivy League schools place such an outsized emphasis on sports recruitment. This is actually something that I've seen him touch upon in his podcast, as well as several other podcasts that he works with. This seems to be something that he has a lot of curiosity about, is the impact of recruitment in Ivy Leagues. Malcolm Gladwell is very open about the fact that he is incredibly frustrated by the influence and the impact of Ivy League schools. Well, just the highest tiers of education in the United States really frustrates him. He thinks that it really perpetuates a lot of problems in society. And so this is going to be a continuation of that conversation that you may have seen if you have read any of his other books or if you listen to his podcast. And then he asks, what is the magic third and how does it impact racial harmony? And these are just some of the many different things that he is trying to address in this book. So as usual, and typical to Malcolm Gladwell, he uses a series of gripping case studies. He takes us from the streets of Los Angeles, where some of the world's most sophisticated bank robbers exploited tipping points in law enforcement, and he looks at a long-forgotten 1970s television show that inadvertently reshaped global culture. He also reevaluates two of the most defining crises of modern times, the COVID-19 pandemic and the opioid epidemic. And he offers an alternative history of how they spread and why interventions failed or succeeded. Ultimately, Gladwell argues that tipping points are not just forces to change, but also tools that can be wielded, often with troubling consequences. And as always, his storytelling blends social science with compelling real-world examples, making this book as insightful and at times a scary or an unsettling read. To discuss some of its strengths, I'd say that Gladwell's greatest strength has always been his ability to take complex sociological and psychological concepts and turn them into gripping narratives. And of course, Revenge of the Tipping Point continues this tradition by weaving together historical research and modern trends and some surprising connections between seemingly unrelated topics. One of the book's standout sections actually examines how social media has supercharged tipping points, making them easier to manufacture and manipulate, whether it's misinformation campaigns or viral internet trends or the rapid shifts in political discourse. Gladwell reveals how those who understand these dynamics can steer events in ways that benefit them, sometimes at the expense of truth and stability. I think that is something that probably anyone with any interest in our current social or political discourse can relate to. And I certainly think that he has some important and thought-provoking things to add to that conversation from this book. Additionally, the book feels a little more personal than some of his previous works. I mean, the whole purpose of it, Gladwell is reflecting on his ideas and how they've been used or misused or even been co-opted in ways that he hadn't anticipated. And I think that this self-awareness makes this book just have a little more depth to his analysis, and it makes the book feel like both a continuation as well as a reassessment of his earlier work, hence the name Revenge of the Tipping Point. That being said, there are a few things about Revenge of the Tipping Point that I do think are worth pointing out. I don't mean for these criticisms to be overly amplified, because I must say, before I even give any criticism, I generally enjoy Malcolm Gladwell's work. I do think that there are a few things to be wary of about the way he writes that I think could be not necessarily misleading, but just they take really complex and important topics and can make them a little too simplistic. And I think that is a problem that you're going to find in almost all of his works. But that being said, I do really enjoy them, and I do think they're worth a read to almost anyone that has any interest in nonfiction writing, especially if they're interested in how our society works. But that being said, especially I as an academic do feel the need to add a few caveats when I take on a book like this. Revenge of the Tipping Point suffers from some of the same issues as Gladwell's other books. His ability to craft compelling narratives sometimes comes at the expense of rigorous academic analysis, which, to his credit, he is trying to incorporate rigorous academic analysis into his explanation, but much to the chagrin of most academics, I would argue, or at least to some academics that might feel like he oversimplifies some things that they were trying to say or some arguments they were trying to make. But that is an academic's life. That is something that we're constantly fighting with. And I'd also say that while the book does raise some fascinating questions, some of his conclusions feel a little more anecdotal or situational or possibly even speculative. For example, his discussion on how a niche TV show from the 1970s called Holocaust, the Family Weiss story, supposedly reshaped modern society. It's entertaining, and he does give some really compelling evidence, but it also may leave some skeptics questioning whether the correlation is as strong as he suggests. And there are a few times throughout this book where I thought to myself, I think this is an interesting idea, but you may have just overdone yourself a little bit. But again, he is at least presenting very compelling theories. And I will say this, I think he does generally do it in a responsible way. When it comes to people making guesses or making summations, I think a willingness to continue with the conversation and to be shown where you might be wrong is incredibly valuable. And I do think that Malcolm Gladwell has that characteristic, and I think that's really important. I think when you become convinced of something and then you're unwilling to see new information in any way that is going to be able to shape that, I think that's where things become really problematic. And I don't think that that is something that Malcolm Gladwell suffers from. Then again, I don't know him personally, so I could be wrong. But what I have heard on his podcast and from all of his books, which I think I've now read all of them, I get the impression that he is certainly willing to engage with new information, and he's certainly willing to engage with reassessment of his own conclusions. So who is this book for? Well, if you enjoyed The Tipping Point, or books like Freakonomics, or even Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, you'll likely find Revenge of the Tipping Point both engaging and thought-provoking. I mean, it's a great choice for readers that are interested in social psychology as well as media literacy, and as usual, the hidden mechanics behind how ideas and behavior spread, which seem to be probably at the heart of pretty much everything that Malcolm Gladwell writes about. You could look at it this way or that, but by and large, the thing that he is trying to look at is what are the hidden mechanics by how things get propagated or how things get shaped the way that they do. And I think that that's what makes him such an interesting read. I would say that it's an excellent read for those who want to better understand how trends and movements and even public perception can be influenced, sometimes intentionally, sometimes chaotically, and just sometimes accidentally. If you've ever wondered why some ideas catch on while others fizzle out, this book offers plenty of insights into why that might be the case. So who is this book not for? Well, if you're looking for something that is grounded in heavy data analysis and peer-reviewed research, this one might not be for you. And I don't mean that as a knock on Gladwell. His whole purpose is trying to explain complex issues in a simple and engaging manner, which I respect. So, to do so, Gladwell has a tendency to lean heavily on storytelling, which makes for a fun read, but sometimes it can sacrifice the depths for accessibility of a topic. And that is always a balance that I think that he is trying to weigh, and I give him credit for trying. But I would argue that for almost any of the major points that he makes, you probably are going to want to go find additional resources. If it resonates with you and you thought, oh, that is a compelling thought, then I would recommend maybe trying to find some of the resources he relied on to get that information to just get a little more of a nuanced view. That is going to generally be my conclusion from a book like this that draws these really broad and really strong conclusions. I'd say that they probably have some truth to them, but you're almost definitely going to want to go get just a little more detail so that you can have a more refined understanding. Likewise, if you found his previous books to be frustrating due to their broad generalizations or some of his speculative claims, then you may encounter similar issues in this book. And while the themes are compelling, some arguments could possibly benefit from stronger empirical backing. I would imagine in many cases he had lots of empirical data, at least he suggests it by the way he writes about it, but I think actually giving more and more numbers could be helpful, or I mean, again, that's part of the balance that someone like him is doing. You know, some people don't want more and more numbers. If you show them one graph that it helps explain or show something, that's good enough for them, and now they just want to hear what point you're trying to make. That's where this difficult balance comes in, from the storytelling that he does to showing actual data and then drawing conclusions. This is something that I would like to think he struggles with, to trying to get the right balance, but it is also something that anyone reading should be aware of and should keep in the back of their mind. I would say overall, Revenge of the Tipping Point is a fascinating and a timely follow-up to one of Gladwell's most influential books. I mean, it expands on his original ideas while also grappling with their unintended consequences. So it makes for one of his most thought-provoking works because of that. And while it's not without its flaws, it is a compelling read for anyone that's curious about the forces that shape our world. If you have read Revenge of the Tipping Point, what do you think? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. I would love to hear more about what you guys think about not just this book, but anything by Malcolm Gladwell. Please let me know. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.